Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to our first session on MyTarbiyyah Reflections. So I'd just like to start off with an essential dua. Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'a wa rizqan tayyiba wa amalan mutaqabbala. Many of you may have memorized this dua. Many of us may be praying this as well. But I think it's very important to go into the meaning of this. So we start off by saying, Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'a. So here, what we're asking from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, Ya Allah, I'm asking you for not just any knowledge, I'm asking you for beneficial knowledge. And what's the difference between the two? I think it's very important to understand, is we're living in an age where there is just so much information, there's so much knowledge. So here, this dua implies that knowledge can be of benefit, but there's also certain types of knowledge which can be quite harmful. So I'm sure we can think of lots of examples of this. And again, we're living in an age where there is so much misinformation, there's so much knowledge which is actually misguiding. There's knowledge which is unfortunately triggering off our desires to make some really wrong decisions. So here, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was very particular and emphasizing to the ummah that when you ask for knowledge, make sure it's beneficial, because it's only beneficial knowledge which will help you attain the skills, attain the information, which can then be turned into action, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept, and which will be a means of us attaining His pleasure. So, as'aluka ilman nafi'a, absolutely essential. Then, wa rizqan tayyiba, so provision. So here, normally, when we hear the word rizq, everyone attributes this to rizq in terms of food. But that's a very narrow meaning. Rizq here means also knowledge. So this is knowledge is also a form of rizq. Your children is a form of rizq. So absolutely everything around you is a form of rizq. So here we're saying rizqan tayyiba. So here, on the screen it says goodly provision, but tayyib here means something which is pure. And we, inshallah, in the workshops, in the classes that we have, we're going to talk about tayyib food especially. So as an example, we all know the difference between halal and haram food, but do we know the difference between food which is tayyib? So is it possible to have food which is halal, but it's not pure, it's not nutritious, it's not beneficial? There is a possibility. But if we look deeper in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to eat food which is halal, then there's always, with the halal, there is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions tayyib as well. So automatically Allah is saying, don't just have food which is halal, which has been slaughtered, in a halal manner. No, that's not good enough. You need to go the extra step and make sure that food is then tayyib, it's pure, it's nutritious, it's beneficial for the body. It's not going to cause high blood pressure. It's not going to increase your cholesterol. It's not going to make you hyperactive. So all these are forms of tayyib food. So here, in the dua, we're saying rizqan tayyiba. And then finally, wa amalan mutaqabbala. So after we've acquired, after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us such beneficial knowledge, and He's also given us tayyib, rizq tayyib, pure provision, then make us do deeds which you will accept. So deeds that are acceptable, deeds that have been done with sincerity, deeds that have been done in good spirit, without showing off in front of people. And again, this links to one of the hadith that we hear again and again. Innamal a'malu binniyat, that verily actions are based on intentions. So there's no point doing actions which have the wrong intentions. And this is directly linked into Tarbiya, inshallah, which we'll cover as well. So may Allah accept this dua for all of us, inshallah. So I'd just like to ask then on the group, why are we here today? If I could just have some answers. Why are we here? Why are we sparing, the 45 minutes out of our busy schedules? It's a Thursday evening. I'm sure, we've got lots of things to do. Why are we here? We're here for our Tarbiya. Okay. Okay. Why are we here? We've come to acquire knowledge. Are we here to learn something? I mean, does anyone have any questions they want to ask in particular around Tarbiya, around parenting, around mentoring? Okay, so I'm getting some direct messages to learn to be good parents. Okay, mashallah. So the bigger the intention that we have, as we said, in the a'malu binniyat. Okay, so we need to learn, we need to improve ourselves. Okay, mashallah. So I think this is a very important question that we really need to ponder upon. That why am I here today? What is it that I want to get out of this session? Because there's no point, sparing 45 minutes of your life. And then once we leave here, and when we're asked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how did you spend those 45 minutes? With what intention did you attend that class? We're going to be held accountable for this. So, I make dua, yeah, to get understanding on what Tarbiya is and also how to implement it into our lives. Okay, mashallah. So yeah, we should be able to leave the session and at least be content that I can stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, look, this is the intention I came with, really to learn and implement something in our lives. Absolutely. So Jazakallah for your answers there. One really important thing that we have to think about is, what is my world view? Okay. Because the way we see the world shapes our intentions, it shapes our efforts, it shapes everything. So, for example, what's our world view when it comes to education? So normally, if education is mentioned here, then people would refer to what GCSEs, A levels, PhD, acquiring knowledge to, entrepreneurship to do a business. So what is it that the world has portrayed education as? And then what's my worldview? What do I see education as? So is education a mean of me being financially secure, economically secure for the future? Is that what education is to me? Is education for me the ability to get a certificate, improve my CV so I can get a better job, so I can climb the ranks? Is that what education is? Is education, to win a prize and to come first in class? So what is it that I mean by education? And again, I'd be interested to, if you could share what education means to you. Similarly with success. So what is success? If we look at the world around us, what is the definition of success? So someone who's suited, they're booted, they look fresh and they're smiling and they've got a nice house, they've got a car. I mean, after all, that's what we see on all the billboards around us. Okay, that is what is classed as success. So what's my worldview? So when we talk about success, then what does success mean to me? If you ask teenagers, so I'm holding lots of sort of teenage workshops, and when I ask my students there, what's going to make you a successful person? And most of the time, the answer is, I will be successful if I can get into the university of my choice to study this degree. So then my question is, okay, then what? Then my success is that I can, go through that degree and I can, get a first class with honors. Okay, then what's success after that? Then I need to get a job. And what's success after that? Then I need to get married. And then I need to settle down. I need to have a house. And then, so then I need to go into entrepreneurship and I have my own business. Okay, and then so now do you class yourself as a successful person? And the answer is yes. So that's the worldview, current worldview of success. But is that what success means to me as a Muslim? Okay. Career, again, something similar. To get to the peak of my career, that's that to have a career where I have lots of people working underneath me, where I can work from home. Is that what career means to us, especially from an Islamic perspective? What does death mean? So death is a topic where no one wants to. So my worldview on death is it's really sad. It's something which I don't want to talk about. It's something which, if I think about it, actually upsets me. It gets me depressed. Is that the worldview of death? I mean, the recent atrocities that are happening around the world, lots of questions are being asked. Why? Because the worldview of death is, oh my God, this person couldn't live and finish off his education. This person didn't achieve success because he wanted to become a businessman. This person was about to reach the peak of his career and he died. Okay, that's such an atrocity. So this is the worldview of death at the moment. And same with life. What's the worldview of life? What does it mean to have a meaningful life? What was life given for? To enjoy ourselves? So this is the current worldview, which, if we go onto the systems, whether it's the educational institutions, whether it's all the industry, the capitalist industry, the jobs, wherever, this is generally the worldview which is being portrayed. And without us even knowing, unfortunately, the danger is this is how we begin to see the world as well. So why do I mention this? I mention this because, unfortunately, we see things at the moment as a resource or opportunity. So, as an example, if we were to talk about Africa, then that's seen as a center of resource for mining and minerals. Okay. And back in the days, Africa was seen as the land of opportunity to acquire slaves, not for a personal individual, but this is where we're going to get the slaves from. That's why we had hundreds and thousands, if not millions, of slaves being shipped over. So Africa as a country, as a nation, as a continent was seen as a resource, as an opportunity. If we look at India, so when the British colonized India, what was the initial reason why they went to India? It was for the spices, and when they got there, they thought, fantastic opportunity, let's take over. If we look at the World War, so during the World War, where they were short of soldiers, they saw the subcontinent as an opportunity because it was full of resources. What was a resource? It was human bodies. We need human bodies to stand up and fight the war. Friends. Unfortunately, we're seeing this. Friends are seen as a resource or as an opportunity that I need to develop a network. I need to speak to this person so I can make him into a customer. I can sell him a product or a service. So unfortunately, in a materialistic world, this is how these things are seen. It's always a resource or an opportunity. What we need to ask ourselves is, what is my perspective? This is really important, because until we don't rectify our perspective, we cannot do the tarbiyah of our children. Okay, when we talk about tarbiyah, when we talk about education, then we really have to learn to define this. Another example which we talk about quite often is, what's the difference between a house and a home? What's the difference between a relation and a relationship? Okay. We have to define these, and we have to know our worldview. Then the question arises, who dictates my perspective? So where do I get my perspective from? Okay, what should my perspective be? So here we have to really understand that our perspective comes from an Islamic paradigm. Okay, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describe life as? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describe death as? When we talk about education, how is it defined in the Quran, in the Hadith, through the prophetic example? Okay, that's really important. So going back to worldview of education on knowledge, okay, our paradigm at the moment is we need to know more. Okay, the more information, the more knowledge you have, the better person that you are. Okay, so the need of the time is acquire more knowledge. But in our Islamic paradigm is you don't need to have more information, more knowledge. Our paradigm is the little information that we have, we go deep inside and we're able to understand it in depth and in detail. Is it possible to have someone who has pioneered pioneered an invention in technology, or they've gone and studied and they've done some research and they've invented something or discovered something or developed a theory? So this person with so much knowledge, is it possible that this person has a poor temperament? Is it possible that this person is addicted to alcohol and drugs? Is it possible that this person can be cheating on his wife? It's a possibility, right? So we have to understand our perspective of education is not the need to know more, it's to know enough to please the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then know that in so much detail where it then rectifies our choices, our desires. So what are we saying here is, what is Tarbiya? So I think before we answer the question of what is Tarbiya, I think we have to understand what is not Tarbiya. Okay, so a lot of people think that Tarbiya is training, right? Tarbiya is some sort of training that we have to deliver to our kids, and that's it. Tarbiya is done. Tarbiya is not training. If we are to define Tarbiya from an Islamic paradigm, then our worldview, our perspective is Tarbiya is actually mentoring. Okay, so what isn't Tarbiya? To impose restrictions on a child, that is not Tarbiya. To regulate our children or our students by saying, this is wrong, okay, you shouldn't do this, you're not allowed to go here, or this is right, so you will do this because I'm telling you, this is not Tarbiya. My students are so well behaved. When I ask them to stand up, they stand up. When I ask them to sit down, when I ask them to tidy, they listen to me. That is not Tarbiya. Tarbiya is when a person, out of happiness, out of his own free choice and will, makes the correct choice. So Tarbiya is when a person uses his own mind, his own self, his own critical thinking to say, I really want to do this. That is Tarbiya, when a person is able to manage his own choices and not have other people influence him. So Tarbiya is about making people responsible and sensible in their choices. So again, if I break this down a bit more, is there a possibility that a person knows that this food is harmful for me, okay, but he still goes and eats that food? So he knows it's halal and he knows it's not tayyib, but the person still goes and he's not able to control his desire, his nafs, and he goes and makes the wrong decision and he has that food. Okay, here, this kind of a person, Tarbiya is lacking. Okay, so Tarbiya is when a person becomes responsible and sensible in his choices. Namaz. So Tarbiya is when namaz becomes a person's choice and when bad deeds are no longer his choice. So if my child is praying namaz because I'm his father and he fears me, then this is not Tarbiya. Namaz has to be the child's choice. So if I'm to define Tarbiya over here, or talk about the greater goals of Tarbiya, okay, so what we say is, the first greater goal of Tarbiya is a person becomes pure in his intent and exquisite in his wishes. So this is Tarbiya. His wishes become beautiful. So if we have a case where a child desires something, but we have cornered him to do something else, so we've put him in a position where we're restricting him and we're forcing him to do something which we want him to do, this is not Tarbiya. So doing things, being creative in forcing the child, threatening the child, pampering the child, praising the child, to conform to a behavior or act in the way you want them to behave, that is not Tarbiya. If the act has not become the child's own personal choice, then this is not Tarbiya. This is control. The second greater goal of Tarbiya that we talk about is self-accountability. So self-accountability becomes so progressive in an individual that it reaches its peak. So a person should be able to ask himself some really tough questions. So why am I the way I am? Why did I do this? Why am I behaving in this way? Why do I have this compulsive behavior? Why do I have this compulsive attitude or habit? If a person cannot hold himself accountable, his tarbiyah has not been done, he has not been mentored, and neither can this person mentor another individual. So I'm just going to say that again. If a person cannot hold himself accountable, if he can't ask himself these tough questions, then his tarbiyah has not been done, and he's not fit enough to be able to do the tarbiyah of someone else. So a tarbiyah is when a person is able to judge himself and not point the gun at others. So we should be able to critically evaluate ourselves and not others. This is Tarbiya. Now, what is the Tarbiya methodology? Okay, so we've sort of, in a nutshell, briefly defined what Tarbiya is. So what's the method where we can do the Tarbiya of our students, our kids? Really good question. But again, before we understand the methodology, we have to understand what is the incorrect methodology. Okay. So quite common in our homes or in institutions, what we find is the first step towards achieving the tarbiyah of children is we need to control them. So that's where we set rules, and you have to conform to these rules. Okay. So once a child is in this setting where we are in full control and the child has no control over himself, then we go and set conditions. So at this time, you must do this. You must submit your assignment at this time. This is how many words I want from you. This is the format in which you need to write the assignment. Okay. So we start imposing conditions. If you do this, you pass. If you fail, then you are humiliated, you are named, you are shamed, okay? You don't receive any prizes. So now we start building conditions on the child. And then finally, once we've got the conditions in place, we set the conditions, then there is constant monitoring. So then we have assessments, okay? If I speak from a sort of work perspective, then we have cameras, okay? Cameras to monitor the behavior of staff so they don't steal. We have cameras on the road to stop people from speeding. The problem here is the moment that monitor is taken away, okay, the moment those conditions are uplifted, the moment we take away our control, or where the individual finds himself where there is no control, where there's no conditions and there is no monitoring, the person, how do we think this person behaves? And this is some of the questions which we're facing from a lot of parents, from a lot of teachers, from a lot of individuals, that they've gone out there and they've gone wild. We can't control them. They can't control themselves. It's because the Tarbiya methodology that we used was based on control, condition, and monitoring. So if that's the wrong methodology, then what's the correct methodology? So what we say is the correct methodology is, number one, we have to form a relationship. So we're living in an age, just a few days ago, I was reading an article that's been published. So in the US, approximately 50% of the population at some point in their life, and more often than not, is reported to have a feeling or have a negative sensation of feeling lonely. This is a really big problem in our society. People are lonely. So they're living alone. They don't have anyone to share their feelings with. They don't have anyone to share their problems with. They don't have anyone to spend time with, to learn from. There is no bonding. There is no relationship. This is, if we think COVID was a pandemic, that's a very small issue. This feeling of loneliness, this feeling of not being in a relationship, or for those that are in a relationship, it's not stable, it's not healthy, it's not conducive. So Tarbiya can only be achieved by building a relationship with the individual who you want to mentor. So what does that mean? So once you're in a relationship with someone, there's different levels of relationships, which inshallah we'll go into. So there's what we say, there's 5 dimensions of a relationship. But just briefly to touch upon it, a relationship should be something, it needs to look in the way where I feel comfortable around this person. Why? Because he's not going to judge me. No matter what I share with him, no matter what question I ask, I will not be judged. Secondly, I feel safe in sharing my experiences because I know this person isn't going to go and tell anyone. Okay. And he's not going to treat me any different once I share with them that I have this habit. I have this bad habit of lying. He's not going to judge me. He's not going to share it. And his attitude towards me isn't going to change. Our relationship, unfortunately, is conditional. So if you achieve so and so, I will be a good parent or I will be a good teacher. If you don't do this, then I'm sorry. So our relationship is conditional. But the methodology to do Tarbiya is having unconditional love for the person that we're coming into contact with. What is unconditional love? So an example which we always give is, if a child makes a mistake, okay, if they break a glass, then what would be our typical response? If we have a poor temperament and if we've not worked out on ourselves, then we would be shouting, we'd be screaming, there'd be some sort of a punishment, whether it's physical punishment, may Allah forgive us, or whether it's psychological torture. Okay, you're grounded, there's no food for you today, go in the room, go sit in the corner. Okay. The Tarbiya methodology is, we say, tum jaise bhi ho, mere ho. Tumse glass toot gaya, tum mere ho. So in English, we'd say, no matter how you are, you belong to me and I love you. I love you no matter what. You broke a glass, I love you. You didn't pass your exams, I still love you and I respect you just as much as before the examination and after the examination. I love you no matter what. Just imagine coming into contact with a person who gives you this much love. Would you like to stay in this person's company? That, I can afford to make a mistake and this person makes me feel safe. So the first methodology, the first step towards achieving Tarbiya is we need to come into relationships. Like I said, inshallah, in the upcoming sessions and workshops, we're going to discuss this in detail. The second thing is We should have the ability to have reflective conversations. So what's a reflective conversation? A conversation is a dialogue. So dialogue, two people talking. At the moment, our methodology, and again, I have lots of students who come to me, and it's a case of I've been at school for 6, 7, 8 hours, and I've just been spoken to. It's a monologue. I'm being taught. Then what happens is they come home and the parents ask them, how was school? Then they go to madrasa, or they go to like an Islamic institution, for example, and they're just being taught. So all this time that 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours that the child has been in this institution where we're sending them with this mindset that their tarbiya is being done, what's actually happening is there's no dialogue. It's just monologue. There's control, there's condition, there's monitoring. So when will a child, when will the teenager be able to speak up and say, you know what, I don't want to talk about school anymore. I want to talk about how I'm feeling. I got bullied at school today, or this is going through my mind, or I have a question. I have a question. Why are people dying in the world? But they're not allowed to ask these questions. That's a silly question. You just need to answer my questions because I'm senior, I have the authority. I will ask questions. You need to remain quiet. So the Tarbiya methodology is questions are asked. When a person asks questions, that is when and where he begins to discover himself. He begins to understand the world. When a person asks a question, it's the thirst of his intellectual self to discover something. What we do is we stop the questioning process. What we should be concerned about, and again, our teachers always say this, if a child is sick, they have jaundice. That's a problem, we understand. But if a child or an individual stops asking questions, that's much more serious. Why? The child or this person no longer wants to learn. I mean, naturally, if we look at kids up until the age of 5 or 7, is there any child who doesn't ask questions? Who's taught them to ask questions? They themselves, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created it in their fitrat that they want to ask questions. The problem here is we don't have the time, or we feel uncomfortable, or we're not able to answer them. And we're so fixated on this ideology that stop asking silly questions and just do the work. That's not a silly question. That's a question where the child is feeling thirsty intellectually to learn about this. Okay. We stop the questioning process. So how should a conversation look like? So a child comes and asks a question, and the adult will reply by asking a question back. Then there's an answer, then there's a question, then there's another question, and there's another question. So these questions turn into reflective conversations, which trigger off a thought process where the person starts to go deep into this concept about why are people dying, for example, okay? Or why did Allah Ta'ala make, the world round, or why are the clouds like this, or why, how does a car run? I mean, why is the tire, spinning around and round? What's spinning it round and round? Okay. So all these inquisitive questions when children ask, it triggers off an intellectually sort of stimulating process, which then forces them to discover the world and themselves. And then finally, it's about self-accountability. So what do we talk about when it comes to self-accountability? Is a big part of Tarbiya is a person is able to, like I said, ask themselves questions and say, why did I do this? What is the impact of me making these decisions, or following through with this? If a person is unable to ask themselves the question, okay, if he's not able to become self-accountable, he will be accountable to a force. That force will control, condition, monitor, and make a person do what they want them to do. No, I need to be able to hold myself accountable. So why isn't my namaz as good as it should be? Am I even a good person? What I did, is that right? Should I have done this? Versus, why did you do this? Do you know how that person is feeling? So there needs to be a question from the person himself. Why? Why am I like this? And this is actually the sunnah of the Sahaba. If you look at the Sahaba, then we hear the story where the Sahaba came out of the house saying, have I become a munafiq? I mean, that is the peak of self-accountability. I mean, the Sahaba who are in the company of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sahabas the Ashra Mubashira were given the guarantee of Jannah in the world. They are coming out and they have such a peak and understanding of self-accountability that they're questioning their own faith. So these people who knew the Quran, who knew the Hadith, who were praying tahajjud, and they were exerting themselves in deeds and giving charity, and they had an excellent relationship with their family and the society around them. This Sahaba is saying to himself, have I become a munafiq? So Tarbiya, if Tarbiya is done correctly, that's what it brings in. It brings in self-accountability. So what next? I think it's really important over here to understand the Tarbiya of our children is our responsibility, but we haven't understood. MashaAllah, alhamdulillah, may Allah bless everyone here today and around the globe. There's lots of people who really are interested in this whole Tarbiya element, and they wish for the best for their kids and their students. But the problem is the methodology is wrong. The methodology is wrong. We have to learn the correct methodology. And we have to understand it's my responsibility to do this. I mean, an example I was giving and just discussing earlier on today as well is children. When we talk about Sadqa Jariyah, okay, so your child is going to be Sadqa Jariyah. So one thing we have to sort of think, what is Sadqa Jariyah? So if we take the example of a seed, okay, you can take, like a pear tree, for example, or an apple tree or a date tree. So that seed was planted in the ground and it's been there for 30, 40, 50 years and it's giving fruit. Now, if that seed is in the ground, okay, and if it had a brain, it had some sense, or, we turned it into a being, then, and we dug up the seed after 40, 50 years and we'd ask the seed, seed, do you know what you have achieved throughout your life? And the seed would say, I've no idea. I've been buried under the ground for 40, 50 years. I've not seen any light. I've seen absolutely nothing. Okay. But if we were then to show the seed that whilst you were 6 foot under the ground, okay, someone was watering you, okay, there was sunlight, there was oxygen, and then from within you grew a trunk and then some branches and leaves, and for 50 years you have been giving fruit, and all the people that you've benefited, the seed wouldn't comprehend, like, no, I didn't see any of this. If all the people that this tree has benefited, so all the people and all the creatures that this tree has benefited were to be brought in front of the tree, or in front of the seed. So in there you would have insects, you would have birds, you would have all sorts of creatures, you would have humans, okay, and not just one or two, you would have hundreds and thousands, millions of people standing there. The seed would be absolutely shocked that I did all of this. Yeah, that's impossible. How could I have achieved all of this? So that was the one seed, because it sent out from within itself, it sent out the trunk and gave fruit for so many years without knowing what's happening outside. that seed's going to be amazed. This is exactly what our children are. This is exactly what we are. On the day of judgment, when we stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this child will be brought in front of us. And Allah will say, this is your child. So because you did the tarbiyah of this child, you know what this child did? And we will be presented with millions of people that because of your child, because you did their tarbiyah, or because of the charity that you gave, it benefited so and so, and they were able to feed themselves and their kids, and they went to university, or they managed to do this charity project, or they got an education, and they were able to help so many people, and they had families. We're going to be absolutely shocked, like they see that, subhanAllah. This is what our child is. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given our children to us as an investment. It's sadaqah jariyah. So how carefully now are we going to look after this investment? Because this is the sadaqah jariyah that is going to then become the means for us to enter Jannah. So we have to understand the value of this child. We have to understand the value of our students. We have to understand the value of every single person that we come into contact with, that they will become the means of salvation in the hereafter. So we need to stop seeing them as resources or things that we're going to use, and instead we need to be able to mentor them. Now, to mentor them, I need to learn how to mentor. So what is it that's wrong in me that I have not been able to develop a relationship with my child or my students? I need to work on something. Okay, and we can't outsource. On the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't going to ask, if he asks me, what did you do with your child? I can't turn around and say, I sent him to school and it's the teacher's responsibility. No, the contract was given to you. You chose to outsource. That was your decision. But the outcome is still your responsibility. So what am I saying is it's our responsibility to first of all understand, I need, like, my kids, my students are my responsibility. Okay. Before I can work on them, I need to work on myself first. I need to understand who I am. I need to have a clear worldview. I need to work on my temperament, my understanding. After that, I can do the tarbiyah of the people around me.